They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. When you get to my age, 78 years young, you find that's not quite right. A picture, a real one, the kind you can hold in your hands, is worth a whole lifetime. It holds the ghosts of who you were, the shadows of what was to come, and the faint, bitter scent of lessons learned too late. I'm looking at one right now. It's tucked away in a heavy, leather-bound album, the kind nobody uses anymore. The photo is glossy, the colours still vibrant. It's from a wedding. A beautiful wedding, by all accounts. A grand affair at the old Greystone Manor, with fountains and ice sculptures and a string quartet playing something by Vivaldi. In the centre of the photo is the bride, Charlotte, looking like a porcelain doll in a gown that cost more than my first house. Beside her stands my son, Robert, handsome in his tuxedo, but his smile doesn't quite reach his eyes. Even back then I could see it. And there I am, off to the side. I'm wearing a lavender dress, a size 16, custom made by a lovely seamstress named Mrs. Gable. I'd felt, well, not beautiful, but dignified, appropriate. My hair was styled, my pearls were on. I looked pleasant enough, a soft smile on my face for the camera. But I know what happened just 5 minutes before that shutter clicked. I know the words that were hissed at me in the powder room, the words that cracked the foundation of my world. And I know what happened 2 hours later, when a ghost from my past walked into that reception and set fire to their perfect gilded life. This picture isn't worth 1,000 words. It's worth a company, a marriage, and a whole lot of tears. It's the story of how my daughter-in-law called me a fat pig at her wedding, and how her father came face to face with the quiet millionaire who had just bought his soul. My story really begins with Arthur, my late husband. Arthur was the sun, and I was just a little planet happily caught in his orbit. He wasn't a rich man, not in the way the world counts riches today. He was a structural engineer, a man who built things to last. He was honest and kind, with a laugh that could shake the dust from the rafters. We had a good life, a simple one. We had Robert. When Arthur died of a heart attack at just 52, my world shrank to a single point of light. Our son. I poured everything I had into that boy. I worked 2 jobs, a librarian by day, a bookkeeper by night, to make sure he had every opportunity. He was a good boy, sensitive, smart, maybe a little too eager to please, a trait he got from me. He went to a good university, got a respectable job in finance, and I was so proud I thought my heart would burst. Then he met Charlotte Holloway. She was dazzling. The kind of woman who walks into a room and sucks all the air out. Blonde, impossibly thin, dressed in clothes that whispered money instead of shouting it. She was the only daughter of Preston Holloway, a man who had clawed his way up from nothing to build Holloway Innovations, a mid-sized tech components company. Preston was the quintessential new money titan, loud, arrogant, and utterly convinced of his own genius. His wife, Patricia, was a nervous, bird-like woman who seemed to exist only to smooth her husband's ruffled feathers. From the very beginning, Charlotte treated me like a quaint, slightly embarrassing piece of furniture. The first time Robert brought her to my little brick house, the one Arthur and I bought in 1975, she stood in the foyer and her eyes scanned every corner with a look of polite horror. "Oh, it's so cozy, Beatrice," she'd said, the word cozy landing like an insult. Over the next 2 years, I endured 1,000 tiny cuts. There were the backhanded compliments about my cooking. "I just don't know how you manage with all that butter, I'd blow up like a balloon." The helpful suggestions for my wardrobe. You know, a darker colour like black would be so much more. Slimming. And the constant, subtle erosion of my relationship with my son. Robert, bless his heart, was so smitten he couldn't see it. He'd laugh and say, "Oh, Mum, that's just Charlotte's way. She doesn't mean anything by it." But she did. She meant every single word. She was systematically devaluing me in his eyes, making me seem old, out of touch, and, worst of all, common. The Holloways were thoroughbreds. I was a plough horse. The engagement was announced at a lavish party at their country club. Preston Holloway made a speech, booming about the union of two great families. I stood there in my best department store dress, feeling like a fraud. My family wasn't great, it was just me. The wedding planning was an exercise in humiliation. I was consulted on nothing. When I offered Arthur's mother's lace for the veil, Charlotte had smiled thinly and said, "That's a sweet thought, Beatrice, but we're going for a more modern aesthetic." When I suggested a few of my old friends be invited, she'd patted my arm and said the venue had a strict capacity limit. The topic of my weight was her favourite battlefield. I've never been a slender woman. I'm built for comfort, not for speed, as Arthur used to say. I like to bake. I like to eat. And at my age, a few extra pounds are the least of my worries. To Charlotte, it was a moral failing. "We really need to find you something flattering for the wedding," she'd said during one excruciating shopping trip, holding up a dress that looked like a black tent. "We don't want you to feel self-conscious in the photos." I finally had a dress made, a lovely shade of lavender silk. I thought I looked nice. I felt like a mother of the groom should. I was wrong. The day of the wedding arrived, a crisp, perfect Saturday in October. The Greystone Manor was breathtaking. Everything was white and gold. The scale of it was obscene. I saw Robert before the ceremony. He looked nervous, but happy. "You look beautiful, Mum," he said, giving me a quick, distracted hug. "You look so handsome, sweetie, just like your father." He smiled, but then Charlotte swept in, a whirlwind of tulle and entitlement. "Robbie, darling, we need you for pictures. Beatrice, you'll be in the family photos after the ceremony, of course." She dismissed me with a flick of her wrist. I was an afterthought. I found my seat, in the front row, as custom dictated, but I felt a million miles away. The ceremony was a blur of expensive flowers and hollow words. When they were pronounced husband and wife, everyone cheered. I clapped, a polite, lonely sound in the cavern of my own chest. The reception was even grander, a ballroom draped in silk, a 10-piece band, champagne flowing like water. I sat at the designated family table with Preston and Patricia Holloway. Preston was holding court, his voice a foghorn of self-congratulation. "This is what it's all about, eh?" he bellowed, clapping a shell-shocked Robert on the back. "Building a legacy. My girl. My company. Everything's coming up Holloway." About an hour in, I was making my way across the polished dance floor to congratulate an old cousin of Arthur's when a waiter, a young kid who looked terrified, stumbled and sloshed a tray of red wine. A few drops spattered onto the pristine white skirt of Charlotte's gown. It was a tiny stain, no bigger than a dime. But Charlotte's face curdled. Her eyes darted around, looking for someone to blame, and they landed on me. I was the closest person to the accident. "Oh my God!" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the music. The band faltered. People turned to look. "It's all right, dear," I said, trying to be soothing. "A little club soda will take that right out." She looked at me, her blue eyes turning to chips of ice. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking through me, at everything she despised. My modest home, my simple life, my very existence. She leaned in close, her voice a venomous hiss meant for me, but loud enough for the nearest tables to hear clearly. "You did this, didn't you? You probably bumped into him. You are so clumsy. I should have known you'd find a way to ruin my day, you fat pig." The words hit me with physical force. Fat. Pig. The air rushed out of my lungs. The music had stopped completely. A horrified silence fell over our corner of the ballroom. I saw Preston Holloway's smirk, Patricia's panicked glance. I looked at my son, my Robert, praying he would defend me, praying he would stand up and say, "Don't you dare speak to my mother that way." He did nothing. He stood there, frozen, his face pale. He looked from his new wife's furious face to my shocked one, and in that moment of decision, he made his choice. He put a tentative arm around Charlotte. "Honey, let's just go to the powder room," he murmured to her, not to me. "We'll get it cleaned up." He turned his back on me and led his bride away. The shame was a physical thing, hot and suffocating. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on me, some pitying, some scornful. I turned, my heart a leaden weight in my chest, and walked away. I didn't run. I walked with the slow, deliberate steps of a woman whose world had just ended. I walked out of the ballroom, through the grand marble foyer, and out into the cold October night. I found a stone bench in the garden, hidden behind a large hedge of roses. And there, alone, I finally let myself cry. I cried for Arthur, who would never have let anyone speak to me like that. I cried for the son I had lost, not to death, but to weakness and a woman made of ice. And I cried for myself, for the humiliation that felt like a brand on my soul. After a few minutes, my phone buzzed in my clutch. It wasn't Robert. It was a name I hadn't seen in a while. A man who was a living piece of my life with Arthur. Julian Croft. I almost didn't answer, but a part of me, a small, desperate part, needed to hear a friendly voice. I swiped the screen. "Beatrice?" His voice was calm and deep, just as I remembered it. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just landed in New York and saw I missed a birthday call from you last week. Everything all right? You sound off." And just like that, the dam broke. I told him everything. The years of little insults, the wedding, the dress, the spilled wine, and the final, brutal words. I sobbed the whole ugly story into the phone, huddled on a cold stone bench in my lavender dress. Julian listened. He didn't interrupt. He just let me pour it all out. When I was finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't an empty silence. It was heavy, weighted. "Beatrice," he said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. "What is the name of the girl's father?" "Preston Holloway," I sniffled. "He owns a company called Holloway Innovations." Another pause. Then, "I see. You stay right where you are. I'm sending a car. We're going to have a late dinner." "Julian, no, you don't have to." "Beatrice," he said, and there was a tone in his voice I hadn't heard since the day he stood over Arthur's grave and swore he'd always look out for me. "The car will be there in 20 minutes. It's a black Lincoln. The driver's name is Michael. Don't argue." He hung up. I sat there, confused and numb. I didn't know it then, but I had just lit a fuse. To understand what happened next, you have to understand about Julian Croft. When Arthur and I were first married, Julian was a kid in his early 20s working in the mailroom at Arthur's firm. He was brilliant, an orphan who had put himself through night school for computer science. He had an idea for a new kind of software, a data processing algorithm that was revolutionary at the time. No bank would give him a loan. They saw a poor kid with no collateral and a wild dream. Arthur saw genius. We didn't have much, but we took out a second mortgage on our little house. We gave Julian Croft $20,000, every penny we could scrape together. It wasn't a loan, it was an investment. Arthur told him, "We believe in you, son." That $20,000 investment became the seed money for what would eventually become Croft Enterprises, a global technology conglomerate. Julian never forgot. For the first few years, he sent us small dividend checks. Then the checks started getting bigger. After a decade, he came to our house and handed us a check that paid off our mortgage and our son's entire college education, with plenty left over. He tried to give us more, stock options worth millions, but Arthur had refused. "We didn't do it for the money, Julian," my husband had said, clapping him on the back. "We did it because it was the right thing to do. You just promise me you'll do the same for someone else someday." After Arthur died, Julian was a rock. He handled the funeral arrangements, dealt with the lawyers. He called me every week for years. Eventually, as his company grew into a behemoth, the calls became less frequent. But he never missed a birthday or an anniversary of Arthur's passing. I knew he was wealthy, but I lived in my own little world. I had no idea of the scale. I thought he was a millionaire. I didn't realize he was a billionaire, a titan of industry who moved markets with a single phone call, a man who bought and sold companies like other people buy groceries. The black Lincoln arrived as promised. Michael, the driver, was respectful and kind. He opened the door for me and didn't say a word about my tear-stained face. He drove me into the city, to a quiet, elegant restaurant I'd only ever read about. Julian was waiting at a secluded table in the back. He stood up when he saw me. He was in his late 50s now, with silver at his temples, but he had the same intense, intelligent eyes. He was wearing a simple, dark suit that probably cost a fortune, but on him, it just looked right. He pulled me into a hug. "B," he said softly, using Arthur's old nickname for me. "I am so, so sorry." He sat me down, ordered me a brandy, and let me tell the story again, this time with all the details. He listened with unwavering focus. When I got to the part about what Charlotte had called me, his knuckles went white around his water glass. "And the father? Preston Holloway?" Julian said, his voice level. He just stood there and smirked. "He enjoyed it, Julian. He thinks people like me are beneath him." "Holloway Innovations," Julian mused, swirling the ice in his glass. "They make proprietary microconnectors for the aerospace industry mostly. Decent patents, but terrible management. Over-leveraged. He's been trying to get a third round of venture capital funding for 6 months and has been rejected by everyone. The man is arrogant, and his company is a house of cards." I stared at him. "How do you know all that?" He gave me a small, sad smile. "B, my business is knowing things, especially about smaller tech firms in my sector. His has been on my acquisitions radar for a while, filed under potential but poorly run. I'd forgotten all about it, to be honest." He took a sip of his drink. "I'm remembering it now." A cold dread mixed with a hot thrill went through me. "Julian, what are you going to do?" He looked at me directly, his eyes dark with a loyalty that spanned 4 decades. Arthur believed in building things that last. Men like Preston Holloway believe in tearing people down. I know which side I'm on. I know which side Arthur would be on. He reached across the table and patted my hand. "You just finish your brandy. Don't you worry about a thing." 2 hours after I'd fled the wedding in tears, I returned. Julian insisted. "You will not let them see you run," he'd said. "You will walk back in there with your head held high. I'll be right behind you." The Lincoln pulled back up to the Manor's grand entrance. Julian helped me out of the car. He wasn't my date. He was my support, my armor. As we walked into the foyer, I could feel his quiet strength beside me. The party was in full swing now, the insult seemingly forgotten by the drunken, dancing crowd. I saw Robert and Charlotte on the dance floor laughing. A fresh wave of pain washed over me. Preston Holloway was holding court by the massive, sculpted ice bar, a cigar in one hand, a glass of scotch in the other. He was telling some loud, obnoxious story to a group of sycophantic businessmen. "The key is to never let them see you sweat," he boomed. "You go for the throat. That's how Holloway got where he is today. Guts and glory." Julian guided me gently toward the group. As we approached, Preston's eyes fell on me. His face tightened into a sneer. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Decided to come back for the free food?" The men around him chuckled nervously. Before I could even think of a response, Julian stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between me and Preston. He was not a large man, but he had an aura of authority that made Preston Holloway look like a cheap imitation. "Mr. Holloway," Julian said, his voice calm and clear. "My name is Julian Croft. I'm a friend of Beatrice's." Preston squinted at him, unimpressed. "Croft? Don't know you. You a friend of the family? She doesn't have much family to speak of." One of the other businessmen, a man named Henderson, who ran a local investment bank, suddenly went pale. His eyes widened as he looked from Julian to Preston. "Preston, you idiot," Henderson whispered frantically. "That's Julian Croft, from Croft Enterprises." The name hung in the air. Croft Enterprises wasn't just a company. It was an empire. It was a name that made Wall Street sit up and pay attention. Preston's bravado faltered. A flicker of confusion, then dawning horror crossed his face. He looked at Julian, really looked at him this time, and the pieces started to click into place. The quiet confidence, the expensive but understated suit, the name. You're not," Preston stammered. "I am," Julian said simply. He took a small sip from a glass of water he'd picked up. "And as of 4:30 p.m. this afternoon, when my offer to buy out your majority creditors was accepted, I am the new owner of the debt to which your entire company is leveraged. Which means, for all intents and purposes, I am the new owner of Holloway Innovations." You could have heard a pin drop. Preston's cigar fell from his slack jaw onto the pristine white floor. The glass of scotch slipped from his fingers and shattered at his feet. "The board meeting is Monday at 9 a.m., Julian continued, his voice as soft and sharp as a shard of ice. "We'll discuss the terms of your severance. I was on the fence about the acquisition. It's a messy company, but then my dear friend Beatrice called me. She told me about the charming welcome her new family had extended to her. And that, Mr. Holloway, clarified my thinking immensely." He looked down at the broken glass, at Preston's feet. "You built your legacy, you said. Legacies, like people, should be built on a strong foundation. Kindness, respect, integrity. Things your daughter and your balance sheets seem to know nothing about. You built a house of cards on a foundation of sand, and the tide just came in." Preston Holloway stood there, his face the colour of ash. He looked from Julian's implacable face to mine. In my eyes, he didn't find triumph or gloating. He found nothing but a vast, empty space where my respect for his family used to be. Julian placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Shall we go, Beatrice? I think we're done here." He turned and guided me away. As we walked back towards the foyer, I glanced back. Charlotte and Robert had come over, drawn by the commotion. Charlotte was staring at her father, her perfect porcelain face a mask of confusion and terror. Robert was looking at me, his eyes wide with a horrified understanding of what had just happened. He finally saw. He saw the years of insults, the casual cruelty, the dismissiveness, and he saw the consequences, delivered not by a screaming match, but by the quiet, surgical precision of a man who held all the power. He took a step toward me, his mouth opening as if to say my name. I just turned my back and walked away, Julian Croft at my side. Karma isn't always a lightning bolt. Sometimes it's a slow, grinding decay. The news of the takeover was public by Monday morning. Julian didn't fire Preston immediately. That would have been too kind. He dismantled his life piece by piece. Preston was kept on as a consultant with no power, forced to watch as Julian's people came in and systematically undid everything he had built. They exposed his shoddy accounting, his risky deals, and his incompetent management. Within 6 months, Preston Holloway was a pariah in the business community, a cautionary tale told over expensive lunches. The stress took its toll. He had a major stroke a year later and was left a shell of the man he once was, confined to a wheelchair, unable to speak. His booming voice silenced forever. Charlotte's world collapsed. The money dried up almost overnight. The country club membership was revoked. The credit cards were declined. Her friends, who were only ever friends with her father's money, vanished. She and Robert were forced to sell the ostentatious house her father had bought them and move into a small, rented apartment. Her beauty, which had been her currency, began to tarnish under the strain of bitterness. She blamed Robert for everything. She blamed him for not being ambitious enough, for not having his own money, for being tied to a mother who had brought this curse upon them. Their marriage, built on the shallow ground of wealth and status, crumbled into dust. They were divorced within 2 years. The last I heard, she had married a much older, moderately wealthy dentist in another state, forever chasing the lifestyle she'd lost. And Robert, my son, he came to me about a month after the wedding. He stood on my doorstep, looking thin and lost. He tried to apologize, but the words caught in his throat. So I just opened the door and let him in. I made him a cup of tea, the way I always had when he was a boy, with a scraped knee or a broken heart. We didn't talk about what happened for a long time. We didn't have to. He had seen the truth of the woman he married and the family he had joined. He had paid the price for his silence, for his weakness. He lost his wife, his home, his comfortable life. But in doing so, he found his way back to himself. He found his way back to me. He has a good life now, a quiet one. He's a financial planner at a small local firm. He helps regular people, not corporate sharks. He's married again, to a lovely woman named Sarah, a second-grade teacher with a warm smile and kind eyes. They have a daughter, my granddaughter Lily, who has Arthur's laugh. They come over every Sunday for dinner at my little brick house. Sarah always tells me how cozy it is, and when she says it, the word sounds like a hug. Julian remains my dearest friend. He runs his empire with the same quiet integrity Arthur always admired. He never speaks of that night unless I bring it up. There's no pride in him about what he did, only a fierce, abiding loyalty. He destroyed a man not for sport, but to defend the honor of a friend. He acted as my husband would have, had he been there. I still have that wedding album. Sometimes, late at night, I take it out and look at that picture. I see all the ghosts. I see Charlotte, the beautiful, cruel bride. I see Preston, the arrogant fool, puffed up with a pride that would be his undoing. I see my son, Robert, a lost boy standing on the precipice of a terrible lesson. And I see myself, Beatrice, the woman in the lavender dress, the woman they thought was a nobody, the woman they called a fat pig. They never knew I was the most valuable person there, not because of my own worth, but because of the love and loyalty I had inspired in a good man long ago. They measured worth in dollars and status, and in the end, that is precisely the currency by which they were judged and found wanting. The picture doesn't make me sad anymore. It's just a reminder that dignity is a quiet thing, but it has a powerful echo, and that sometimes the softest spoken man in the room is the one who holds all the cards.